following does not represent approximations as it relates to shaping? What is this question asking? Well, it's really asking, do you know what shaping is? Well, what is shaping? Shaping is reinforcing successive approximations until we reach a terminal behavior. And when we say terminal behavior, we mean the behavior we're targeting. Functional communication is when we typically use shaping or when you'll typically see shaping occur. If we're trying to teach a word like bubble, we might first reinforce buh, and then bub, and then finally bubble. Those are successive approximations to that final behavior, which is the word bubble. In this case, we're looking for the answer choice that does not represent approximations, meaning 3 of these will represent approximations as it relates to shaping, 1 won't. So let's find the one that doesn't. A, John chops an onion in 30 seconds, then 20 seconds, and then in 10 seconds, which meets his goal. Are these successive? Yes. Are they approximations? Yes. John's goal is to chop an onion in 10 seconds. We first do 30 seconds, then 20 seconds, and then 10 seconds until we reach our terminal behavior, which is chopping the onion in 10 seconds. So you can see the behavior is not changing, right? It's just getting closer and closer to being a complete behavior per se. B, in order to start his car, John must push the brake pedal and then turn the key in the ignition. Are we looking at approximations? Well, no, John is really engaging in a task chain here, right? Push the brake pedal down, turn the key. Now, if we had said John must push the brake pedal 25%, then 50%, then 75%, then 100%, those are approximations of pushing the brake pedal. In this case, John is just engaging in the behavior. He pushes the brake pedal, turns the key. B looks like our answer. They do not represent approximations, but we're going to read all of our answer choices as usual. C, when asking for a cookie, Sarah says, k. This is perhaps the most common form of shaping, so we absolutely are looking at approximations here. And then D, to pass his exam, Greg needs to score 80%. He scores 60% on the first 2 practice exams, and then 70% on the 3rd exam. Okay, so Greg's goal is 80%. It's our terminal behavior. The approximations are 60% and 70%. Hopefully we get to 80%. So the answer choice that does not represent approximations as it relates to shaping is B, because John is simply just engaging in the target behaviors. No shaping needed. 2, it is spring break for most public schools. Your client's dad wants to take a 2-day vacation with his wife. He tells you that the client's grandparents, who are stakeholders, will be watching the kids and that sessions are going to continue as scheduled. How should you respond? Be careful here. This is obviously an ethics question. And when you see an ethics question, alarm bells start going off, right? We start thinking of conflicts of interest. We start thinking of, is it appropriate? We start thinking of dual relationships, on and on and on. But we need to be careful. We really need to evaluate the scenario and ask ourselves, well, is it really inappropriate or is this okay? So what is happening in the question? Remember, we're attacking the question. We're doing all our work up front by reading the question, understanding it, and predicting an answer. In this case, your client's dad wants to take a 2-day vacation. He tells you that the client's grandparents, who are stakeholders, will be watching the kids and that sessions are going to continue as scheduled. Now, if you didn't know anything about the ethical code, would that seem okay to you? Sure, why not? They're grandparents. They are qualified stakeholders. Dad approves. They're over 18. They're adults. Nothing seems to be at issue here. Okay, so how should you respond? This seems like a totally okay scenario. A, explain that you cannot hold session unless a parent is at the house. Well, that's just not true. Okay, we need an adult at the house, right? Preferably a stakeholder like a grandparent, okay, or a guardian. But you don't need a parent at the house typically. Now, your company might have a different policy, but ethically, there's really nothing wrong with conducting session with grandparents. B, question whether or not it is a good idea to leave their child at home while they go on vacation. Now, this is very unethical. Okay, we're not maintaining their dignity at all. It is not within our rights at all to question what the client chooses to do on their time. So B is definitely out. Hopefully you can spot that immediately. C, attend session as usual as long as grandparents are in the house. Yes, Grandparents, they're stakeholders, they're qualified adults. Totally okay for you to attend session. Plus, C is absolutely better than B, and then absolutely better than A. Okay. So even if you might have a different policy, C is still going to be our best answer given what we know so far. And then D, refuse to hold session to avoid a door relationship. You're not engaging in a door relationship. You're still providing services on the clock in a professional manner. No door relationship going on. If the question had said something like your client's dad is going on vacation and he wants you to go on vacation with them to hang out, right, and be friends, that's a door relationship. In this case, you're just providing session as instructed with grandparents who are stakeholders. Totally fine, totally okay. You should C, attend session as usual, as long as grandparents are in the house. 3, what is the primary difference between latency and interresponse time? Okay, what are latency and interresponse time? Well, types of continuous measurement. Latency is what? Latency is the time in between an SD and a response. Interresponse time is the time in between two responses. So they're different types of measurement. They go hand in hand because if you charted them out, the time in between your SD and your first response would be your latency, and then response to response from then on would be interresponse time, but they're not the same thing, right? So what is the difference between these two types of continuous measurement? A, latency and IRT are the same thing. Well, we just predicted that they weren't because we went over what we knew about latency and interresponse time, and you are measuring different things. So latency and IRT are not the same thing at all. B, latency includes the SD, IRT does not. Okay, so what do we say? Latency was what? Latency is the time in between the SD and the response. So latency does include the SD. Interresponse time is the time in between the response and the next response. No SD in that type of measurement. Okay. B looks pretty good. What about C? IRT includes the SD. Latency does not. Well, it's just the reverse of B, and we know B is accurate, so C has to be wrong. And then D, latency deals with time while our IRT deals with a count. In both cases, what are we measuring? We're measuring time in between two things. We're looking at time when working with latency and interresponse time. It's right in the name. So what is the primary difference between latency and interresponse time? Latency includes the SD in the measurement. IRT does not. 4, after conducting a task analysis, your supervisor designs the following chain. Open fridge, grab ingredients, toast bread, put ingredients on bread, slice sandwich, eat. If you were conducting a forward chain procedure, when would you first reinforce the client? All right, this is a very straightforward, very easy question. But you have to know what a forward chain procedure is and when you reinforce in a forward chain procedure. Let's think about our types of chaining. We have forward chain, we have backwards chain, we have total task chain, and we have behavior chain interruption strategy. In forward chain, when do you reinforce? You reinforce after the first step, you prompt through the rest. Backward chain, we prompt through the whole chain, reinforce the last step. Total task, we teach the whole task. In this case, we're using a forward chain procedure. We know we're going to reinforce the first step first. So when the question asks if you are conducting a forward chain procedure, when would you first reinforce the client? Well, you know you're going to reinforce for the first step. All we need to do is go back to our chain, look at the first step, open fridge. That is our expectation for the client, that they can independently open the fridge. That's when we plan to reinforce. That's going to be our answer. Let's see if we can find it. A, whenever they complete the chain. If we're conducting a forward chain procedure and this is the first time we reinforce the client in the forward chain, we're not expecting them to complete the chain independently. We're expecting them to complete the first step while we prompt through the rest, but A is just not accurate. B, after they open the fridge. Yes, that's our first step. We're using a forward chain procedure. We're first going to reinforce after they complete that first step. B looks good. What about C? After they eat the sandwich. If we were doing backward chaining, right, C might be accurate, but with forward chaining, we're starting with first step first, and then D, after they slice the sandwich. Slicing the sandwich is right before eat at the end. Okay, we're not there yet. Remember, the question wants to know when you first reinforce the client. So the first step in a forward chain procedure, in this forward chain procedure, is open fridge. So if we're conducting a forward chain procedure, the first time we're reinforcing is when the client opens the fridge. 5, a baseball coach wants to use a measurement procedure that would allow him to monitor who is and isn't engaged in batting practice without having to observe batting practice continuously. What type of measurement might you recommend? Okay, a couple different things going on. We have a baseball coach. He wants to measure a group, okay, who is and isn't engaged in batting practice, but he doesn't want to have to observe batting practice continuously. What can we immediately eliminate? We can eliminate continuous measurement. Frequency, duration, rate, latency, IRT, they're out. If we look at A, we have frequency, so we can get rid of that. It leaves us with partial interval, whole interval, and momentary time sampling. Now, if the coach does not want to have to observe batting practice continuously, is partial interval and whole interval going to suit him well? Well, not necessarily, because of partial interval and whole interval, even though we're taking a sample of practice, he still needs to observe the entire behavior with these types of measurements. However, if he uses momentary time sampling, he can walk away, he can go do other things. As long as he has a timer set, and as long as he checks in on his players at the end of each interval to take momentary time sampling, he is going to be able to monitor who is and isn't engaged in batting practice without having to observe batting practice continuously. So D is a perfect fit for this particular coach. Now, if you don't understand, okay, why momentary time sampling is better than partial and whole interval, go back to the study guide, relearn, review discontinuous measurement, come back to this question. You're on a team with one BCBA and 2 other RBTs. During a group supervision meeting, your BCBA explains the new treatment plan to the team. Another RBT starts to question the use of extinction with the client. Is this acceptable? Okay, what does the question really want to know? They want to know, is it okay that this RBT starts to question this treatment plan? Because you have a BCBA, group supervision meeting, explaining you this treatment plan. As an RBT, are you within your right? Are you within your scope to question treatment plans? Well, absolutely. What does the task list say? The task list says, the ethical code says, we want open, effective, quick communication between BCBA and RBT. That's BCBAs and RBTs work as a team. They collaborate. In order to get the best outcome for clients, they have to work together. And the only way you can work together effectively is open communication. You are absolutely in your right if you don't understand why we're doing something to question the BCBA. Now, just because you question them doesn't mean they're going to agree. Sometimes they might say, well, you might not agree. We're still going to do it anyway. And in that scenario, you still need to do it. But in this case, another RBT starts to question the use of extinction. Is this acceptable? Absolutely. Okay, we've predicted our answer. Let's see what we find. A, no, it is not the RBT's role to design treatment plans. Well, while that is true, it is not the RBT's role to design treatment plans. This particular scenario is totally acceptable. The RBT isn't designing the treatment plan. They're just trying to figure out why we're doing something. A is out. B, no, RBT should not question interventions designed by their supervisor. Again, we just covered this. That is totally false. RBT should absolutely question things they don't understand. C, yes, RBT should always communicate with their supervisors if they have questions. Perfect. This is a perfect answer. C looks great. D, yes, treatment plans should not be put in place unless the entire team agrees. That's just not true either. Ultimately, it's going to be the BCBA or the supervisor's decision. You may disagree. You may ask questions. They may say, we're still going to do it. You have to do it. Okay. The best answer here is this scenario acceptable? C, yes, RBT should always communicate with their supervisors if they have questions. If you want to be a good RBT, you need to learn good communication and you need to learn to ask questions when you are confused or you don't understand something. If we increase a client's ability to stay on task while in the clinic and then instruct his teacher at school to praise the client for staying on task, what are we most likely programming for? Okay, be careful here. It's kind of a wordy, confusing question at first. Read carefully before jumping to the answer choices. We want to increase we do increase a client's ability to stay on task while in clinic. We then instruct his teacher at school, so we're coming outside of the clinic to school, to praise the client for staying on task. What are we most likely programming for? If we are contacting reinforcement in the natural environment and our behavior is continuing, what do we say is happening, right? Now be careful here, okay? This isn't technically response generalization. Okay, response generalization is what? It's when we have multiple responses for one stimulus. In this case, we have a single response, staying on task. We're not programming for response generalization. We want the client to stay on task in the clinic and at school. So now we have to kind of reset a little bit. But if we look at B, maintenance, are we trying to maintain the client's ability? Absolutely. How do we do that? Well, through natural reinforcement or reinforcement in this other environment. That's how behavior is maintained. It's how it's increased. If we instruct the teacher to provide praise and reinforcement to the client for staying on task, that client's ability is much more likely to maintain than if they did not contact any reinforcement at all. Okay, so the teacher is going to function as a tool in maintaining this client's behavior. C, functional communication. We are not examining functional communication in this client. You can eliminate that. And then D, incidental teaching. Incidental teaching is what? It's naturally occurring teaching. We're not naturally teaching here. We're doing all our teaching in the clinic. We're just trying to get this skill maintained to the classroom by having his teacher deliver him reinforcement for engaging in the skill. So what are we most likely programming for? B, maintenance. If you run 5-hour sessions with your client and you are tracking each instance of high-fiving another person, how would you find the rate of high-fiving? What is rate? Start there, okay? Rate is frequency over time. So if you want to find the rate, what do you need to know? You need to know frequency. You need to know time. So let's find the rate of high-fiving. What is our frequency? Okay. Well, we can't really determine that, but we know we need it. Okay. So we're going to do what? We're going to count how many times they high-five another person within this 5-hour session. That's going to be our frequency. To get rate, what do? Well, we just divide our frequency over our time, which is 5 hours. So A, count how many high fives occur in the 5-hour session. What are we missing in A? We're missing the time component. Yes, we're counting how many high fives occur, but that's just our frequency. To get rate, we need to divide this number by 5 hours. B, time how long each high five occurs. That's duration data. We're looking for rate. C, take the frequency of high fives in a session and divide by 5. Yes, we're taking our frequency, dividing by our time, which is 5 hours. We're going to get our rate. And then D, you cannot find rate in this situation. You absolutely can. C is our answer. If you don't understand that, go back, review rate. Remember, all you're doing is finding the frequency and dividing it by the amount of time you're given. And then what else? Above all else, we should always act in the best interest of the. Very easy question, very common sense, but sometimes it helps to remind ourselves who is the most important person. Is the client, stakeholder, supervisor, or ourselves? Now, many of us might believe we are the most important people in our lives. We could be true, but if you're working with a client, we're always going to act in the best interest of the client above all else. Okay, no debate, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then you are given access to clients' data and session notes to help you prepare to take them on as a client. You notice in the session notes that the client engages in hair pulling and biting. Before you start, what should you check for in the client's treatment plan? Okay, there's a very specific task list item that addresses this type of situation. If the client engages in hair pulling and biting, are you potentially in danger? Sure, right? Hair pulling and biting can be very dangerous if done with enough intensity and magnitude, right? So If you notice that your client engages in hair pulling and biting, what do you need to check for? Before you start, what do you check for on the client's treatment plan? Do you A, check the medical history leading to these behaviors? Is that your job as an RBT? No. Now, you might ask a supervisor if something is causing it. They might tell you, but you're not obligated and it's not your responsibility to check for this in the treatment plan. However, B, a crisis emergency plan is something you want to have and check for. A crisis emergency plan is going to tell you what to do if something like this occurs. If hair pulling occurs, if biting occurs, if you're ever in danger, you should have a plan on what you need to do. Before you start, if you have a client who is aggressive, who is dangerous, make sure you have a crisis emergency plan. See what punishment procedure is in place. We have no idea if punishment is used. We're not even talking about that. C is out. And then D, can the client functionally request a break? Again, we have no idea why this behavior occurs. D is not really going to help us, but we need a crisis emergency plan before we start in case something does happen. Okay, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Check out rbtexamreview.com. Any questions, comments, please let me know. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.